I still remember the exact moment everything went sideways. It was late at night, the kind of quiet where even the faint hum of the hospital air conditioning feels deafening, and I found myself standing outside the ICU doors, frozen, staring at my wife. Her face was pale, drenched in tears, her hands gripping the railing as if it could anchor her to reality, and she didn't even notice me standing there. She was whispering something under her breath, words I couldn't quite catch, but the way her body shook told me it was more than grief, it was terror. And yet, when I finally stepped forward, desperate to hold her and understand what had happened, a nurse walked past us, glanced at my wife with a polite, professional smile, and then, without missing a beat, told me something so bizarre it almost made me laugh. Or maybe I would have, if the tension in the air hadn't been suffocating. "Sir," she said, her tone gentle but firm, "no one matching your wife's description has been here to visit your husband tonight. Now, I want you to pause for a second and imagine being in my shoes. Picture seeing someone you've known, loved, shared every joy and pain with, sobbing uncontrollably outside one of the most critical rooms in a hospital, while the staff insists she's never been there. It's the kind of thing that shakes you to your core. And let me tell you, when it happened to me, I didn't just feel confused or scared. I felt the kind of fear that makes your stomach drop, your chest tighten, and your mind race faster than it's ever raced before. This isn't just a story about a hospital, a nurse, or a mysterious visit. It's about trust, memory, and the terrifying possibility that someone you love could exist in your life in ways you don't understand. By the time we get to the end of this video, you're going to understand why I'm still questioning everything I thought I knew about my wife and, honestly, about myself. But more importantly, you're going to see the pieces of a puzzle that I'm still trying to put together, and I promise, it's stranger than you could ever imagine. Before we dive deeper, I need to tell you about my husband's condition that night, because the hospital itself becomes a character in this story. He was in the ICU after a sudden, unexpected collapse. Nothing in our life had prepared us for it, and the doctors were cautiously optimistic but clearly stressed, their faces carrying that familiar mix of hope and fear you only see in intensive care units. I was alone with him for most of the night, taking turns pacing the hallway and checking his vitals through the monitor screen, trying to stay calm for him, though my hands shook like I'd just run a marathon. And then, almost like a scene from a movie, my wife appeared, or at least I thought it was her. Let's be honest, when you're in moments like this, your mind starts playing tricks on you. The fluorescent lights blur, every shadow can look like a figure, every whisper feels like someone speaking directly to you. But my wife, she wasn't a trick. I saw the color of her hair, the way she carried herself, the trembling in her hands. And I could hear her crying. Real crying, not the kind of quiet, polite sniffles you hear when someone is nervous. This was deep, raw grief, the kind that pierces your chest and won't let go. And yet, the moment I tried to reach her, the nurse insisted that no one had been there. My heart skipped, then raced, and I felt like I was caught between two worlds. One where my wife existed and one where she had vanished without a trace. Now here's the part where I want you to really pay attention. I know many of you have been in situations where reality doesn't seem to make sense, where people around you deny things you've clearly seen, or where your memory seems to betray you. But I want you to imagine having the person you trust most in the world, the one who knows you better than anyone else, suddenly treated as if she never existed in a critical moment. And that's when the paranoia starts, when your brain refuses to settle for a simple explanation, and you start noticing little inconsistencies, things that don't line up, people who look at you strangely, and whispers behind your back that you can't quite place. This story isn't just about a hospital hallway, it's about trust, perception, and the dangerous line between reality and the impossible. I need to tell you something about my wife that makes this story even more chilling. She has always been incredibly intuitive, the kind of person who seems to sense things before they happen, who knows the right words to say even before you realize you need to hear them. Friends often joke that she had a sixth sense, and I used to laugh it off, thinking it was just her reading people well. But that night, outside the ICU, there was something more, something I can't explain with logic or reason. It was like she was reacting to something invisible, some presence in the air that only she could feel. And when I asked her what had happened, she couldn't answer. She just looked at me with wide eyes and whispered, "They're here." Those two words would haunt me for weeks, months, maybe even years. By now you're probably wondering who they are. I was too. And I want you to stay with me because we're going to explore every strange twist, every clue, and every eerie moment that led to that night. I promise if you watch until the end, you're going to understand why the nurse's words weren't just strange. They were the start of something far bigger, something I could never have imagined when I first walked into that hospital. This is not clickbait. This is not some exaggerated story for views. This is real, and I'm inviting you to experience it with me as it happened, minute by minute, emotion by emotion, tear by tear. And trust me, the closer we get to the truth, the stranger it becomes. Let me paint the scene for you so you feel what I felt. The hospital hallway was almost empty, except for the faint beeping of monitors and the occasional shuffle of a nurse's shoes. Outside the ICU, the lighting was harsh, sterile, and unkind, making shadows stretch across the floor. My wife's figure trembled in that light, yet it seemed like the shadows themselves were moving with her, dancing across the walls as if alive. And I couldn't shake the feeling that there were eyes on us, watching silently from around the corner. Every instinct screamed at me to grab her, to run, to figure out what was real. But the nurse's calm denial created a chasm between me and my reality, a terrifying gap that made my heart pound and my mind race faster than I thought possible. Now, I want to connect with you directly because I know many of you have been in situations where reality itself seems unreliable. Maybe you've had someone deny something you witnessed, or perhaps you've felt that gut-wrenching disconnect between what your eyes see and what others insist is true. If you've ever felt that creeping uncertainty, you're going to understand exactly what I went through. I want you to feel it, to imagine it, and maybe even question what you would do if you were in my shoes. Because here's the thing, what happens next doesn't just test trust, it challenges everything you think you know about the people closest to you. Before we go further, I need to introduce the main characters in this story so you can follow along. There's my wife, compassionate, intuitive, and fiercely protective, yet now shrouded in fear. There's me, a husband desperate to understand, stuck between disbelief and horror. And then there's the medical staff, including the nurse whose casual denial set off a chain of events I never could have predicted. Each person carries secrets, intentions, and fears, and by the end of this story, you'll see how every decision, every glance, every whispered word connects in ways that seem impossible at first. But I won't reveal everything just yet. The suspense is crucial because you, the viewer, are part of this journey. You're going to witness these moments alongside me, feel the tension, and experience the twists as they unfold. And here's where it gets truly strange. After the nurse's denial, my wife didn't leave. She didn't vanish and she didn't run. Instead, she stayed there, whispering to the air, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting someone to appear from the shadows. I tried again to speak to her, to ask her what she had seen, what she knew, who they were, but she recoiled. The fear in her eyes was different than anything I had ever seen. It wasn't just panic or grief, it was knowledge, awareness of something beyond my understanding. And in that moment, I realized that this wasn't just about a hospital visit or a mistaken identity. This was about something much bigger, something hidden in plain sight, something that might explain why the nurse insisted my wife had never been there. By now, you might be asking yourself, what could be going on here? Was it a misunderstanding? A hallucination? Or something unexplainable? And I don't blame you because when it first happened, I asked myself the exact same questions. But every piece of evidence, every witness, and every reaction only deepened the mystery. I promise as we move forward in this video, I'll show you every clue, every strange encounter, and every twist that will leave you questioning what's real and what isn't. And I'll warn you, the ending is nothing like you expect. As the hours dragged on, the hospital seemed to take on a life of its own. The hum of machinery, the soft footsteps of night shift nurses, and the occasional murmur of distant voices all blurred together into a strange, almost hypnotic rhythm that made it hard to tell what was real and what was imagined. I found myself wandering the hallway, trying to process what I had just witnessed, replaying my wife's tears over and over in my mind. Her expression wasn't just sadness, it was panic, terror, and something else I couldn't put a name to, something that felt ancient and urgent. I remembered every detail, the way she clutched the railing with white-knuckled hands, the quiver in her lips as she whispered those two haunting words, and the subtle shiver that ran down her spine like she had seen something no one else could. And the nurse's calm denial only made it worse, as if the world itself had conspired to erase the existence of the person I loved most in that moment. I couldn't understand it, and deep down, I knew I wouldn't rest until I did. To understand that night, you have to understand my wife because she's the center of everything that followed. She's always had a way of noticing things that others overlook. The small details, the subtleties in people's expressions, and even patterns in events that seem random. Friends and family often teased her, saying she was too sensitive, too perceptive, as if those qualities were flaws rather than gifts. But I always admired her ability to see what others couldn't. And yet, that night, even she seemed shaken in a way that went beyond intuition. She wasn't just upset about my husband's condition, she was terrified of something invisible, something that belonged neither to our world nor to reason. Watching her cry outside the ICU, I felt a strange mixture of protectiveness and helplessness. Every instinct screamed at me to hold her, to pull her into safety, but there was also this sense that she couldn't, or wouldn't, be saved by simple gestures. Something larger was at play and I had no idea what it was. As I tried to piece together what was happening, I started thinking about the night leading up to the ICU visit. My husband had been fine just hours earlier, laughing with our daughter over dinner, making jokes about how he'd beat me at a game of cards later that evening. And then, without warning, his collapse. The paramedics had arrived in a blur of sirens and urgent voices, whisking him away while my wife and I stood frozen in the living room, shocked and disoriented. In those early moments, I had barely noticed her quiet unease. She seemed tense, fidgety, distracted, but I had assumed it was normal worry, normal fear in the face of a medical emergency. Now, thinking back, I realized her unease had been different, premonitory in a way I hadn't understood until that moment outside the ICU. Something had been brewing long before the collapse, something we hadn't recognized. The hospital itself only deepened the unease. It was a place of life and death, of hope and despair, and the sterile environment somehow magnified every emotion. I started noticing small, disconcerting details. Monitors flickering at odd times, lights casting shadows in corners that seemed almost deliberate, and staff members who glanced at us with subtle expressions of discomfort, as if they knew something they weren't saying. One nurse, a young woman with a kind face, lingered in the hallway for just a moment too long, her eyes flickering toward my wife with something between recognition and fear. When I tried to ask her about it, she smiled politely but quickly walked away, leaving me with the sense that there was a hidden narrative playing out just beyond my perception. Every interaction seemed layered, coded, and significant, though I couldn't yet decode the meaning. It felt like I had stepped into a puzzle where every piece mattered and every glance carried weight, and my inability to understand only heightened my anxiety. Meanwhile, my wife's behavior became increasingly erratic in subtle ways that I almost didn't notice until the hospital night. She had always been protective of me and our family, but she started making decisions that seemed impulsive, like checking our home multiple times for small things, double-locking doors, and questioning visitors she had previously trusted. I thought I understood the reason, fear for her family, but now I began to wonder if something else was influencing her, something invisible yet undeniably real. She would wake in the middle of the night, whispering to herself or staring out the window for long stretches without explanation. And when I pressed her, she would smile faintly, almost apologetically, saying, "It's nothing. I'm fine." But I knew better. Her instincts, usually so reliable, were signaling danger. And somehow it was connected to that night in the ICU, though I couldn't yet see the connection. Adding another layer to the mystery were our friends and neighbors, who seemed unusually tight-lipped. At first I thought it was concern for our privacy, but slowly I noticed little cracks. A glance that lingered too long, hushed conversations that stopped abruptly when I entered the room, subtle hints that they knew more than they let on. One neighbor, someone I had trusted for years, hesitated before answering a casual question about the hospital, his hands shaking slightly. He muttered something about things people don't see, then quickly changed the subject. I felt a creeping sense of isolation, as if the world was quietly conspiring to keep the truth hidden from me, and every person I interacted with was a potential piece of a larger, darker puzzle. There was also the growing tension between what I could see and what others insisted was true. The nurse's denial of my wife's presence in the ICU was only the first instance of this. Later, security cameras showed only fleeting, blurred images that couldn't be identified, leaving me questioning my own perception. Did I really see her? Could my mind have conjured the scene out of stress and fear? Or was there something far stranger at work, something that defied logic and explanation? That question haunted me relentlessly, gnawing at my sense of reality and leaving me desperate for answers. And then there were the small, inexplicable occurrences that made the mystery feel alive, almost sentient. Objects in our home moved slightly between rooms, lights flickered when no one was nearby, and faint sounds, footsteps, whispers, and doors closing, repeatedly drew my attention, always at the edges of perception. My wife, sensitive as she was, often reacted before I did, staring toward empty spaces with a mixture of fear and recognition. I couldn't tell if she was seeing ghosts of the past, warnings of the future, or something that existed in some hidden layer of reality I hadn't yet learned to perceive. Each instance heightened the tension, forcing me to follow her lead, yet leaving me uncertain whether I was protecting her or being manipulated by forces beyond my understanding. As the story unfolds, you'll see that this mystery has many layers, each more complex than the last. The hospital, the nurse, my wife's uncanny intuition, and the seemingly disconnected behaviors of friends and family all intersect in ways that initially appear random, but gradually reveal a hidden narrative. And that's exactly what makes this story compelling, what keeps it alive in the mind long after the details are recounted. Every heartbeat, every glance, every whispered word carries significance. You, the viewer, are going to witness it all, and if you pay close attention you might even start seeing the patterns before I do. That's why it's so important to stay engaged and follow the story step by step, because the truth is not immediately obvious, and the clues are subtle, scattered across moments that seem ordinary until they are pieced together. And here's the thing that kept me awake for nights. Just when I thought I was starting to understand, something would happen that erased all progress. A call from the hospital with an unfamiliar voice, a neighbor claiming they saw someone outside our home who didn't exist, and my wife's own cryptic warnings that they're closer than you think, created a cycle of suspense and dread that I couldn't escape. Every new development made the initial mystery, the nurse's denial, feel simultaneously small and monumental, like a single thread in a tapestry of secrets stretching far beyond my comprehension. It was as though reality itself was testing me, and every decision I made had consequences I could not yet foresee. So here we are, still standing at the edge of the unknown, caught between what we can see and what we are told is impossible. My wife's tears outside the ICU were just the beginning, a harbinger of strange events, hidden truths, and shocking revelations that were about to unfold. And I promise you, as we continue this story, you'll see each character's fears, choices, and hidden motivations come alive, drawing you deeper into a mystery that feels both personal and terrifyingly universal. You'll feel the tension, the suspense, and the psychological pull of a story that refuses to release its grip until the very last moment. Just when I thought the tension outside the ICU couldn't get any more suffocating, something happened that changed everything in an instant. I had stepped into the corridor to make a call, trying to reach a friend who might help me make sense of what was happening, when I noticed movement at the end of the hallway. At first, I thought it was a nurse or another visitor, but as the figure drew closer, my stomach knotted with a sense of recognition and dread. It was my wife. Or at least it looked like her. Her hair, her posture, even the way she walked, it all matched her perfectly. But the way she moved had a subtle wrongness to it, a stiffness that made my skin crawl, as if she were imitating herself rather than being herself. My heart stopped, and for a moment I questioned my own perception. Could stress and fear have finally made me see things that weren't real? Or was this something far more sinister, a twist in reality that I wasn't prepared to confront? I called her name, my voice cracking in the quiet hallway, but she didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on the ICU doors, the same haunted focus I had seen moments earlier, yet there was no recognition in her gaze for me. Panic surged through me. I reached for her arm, and as my fingers brushed against her sleeve, she jerked slightly, not violently, but enough to make me stumble backward, heart pounding. That's when the nurse appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, and her expression shifted from calm professionalism to subtle alarm. She whispered under her breath, "You shouldn't be touching her," as if I were doing something dangerous or forbidden, though I had no idea why. My confusion turned into fear because, in that instant, I realized there was more at play than any human explanation could cover. At that point, the hospital itself seemed to take on an unnatural weight, like the walls were pressing in, the fluorescent lights flickering as if struggling against some unseen force. I tried to rationalize the situation. Maybe my wife had come back for a brief moment and I misread her hesitation. Maybe the nurse had her own reasons for issuing warnings, but deep down I knew this wasn't about ordinary rules or logic. Something, or someone, was orchestrating events around us. And the unnerving part was that everyone else, the doctors, the night shift staff, even my closest friends who had come to the hospital, seemed blind to it. It was as if I alone could see the cracks in reality forming around that ICU, and I could feel the danger radiating from every shadow, every flicker of light. The twist that no one could have expected came moments later, when I glanced at the security monitor near the nurse's station. There, caught in the grainy black and white footage, was my wife, or someone indistinguishable from her, moving through the ICU entrance moments before I saw her in the hallway. My pulse raced as I replayed the footage again and again, zooming in, searching for an explanation. Each time the image was the same, my wife, perfectly identical, walking purposefully through the ward, but no record of her entry existed. No visitor log, no security badge scan, not even a single hospital staff member remembered seeing her pass by. And yet, my eyes had seen her, my heart had recognized her fear, and my hands had reached out to her. How could this be possible? How could someone exist in the hospital, interact with the environment in subtle ways, yet leave no trace of her presence? Meanwhile, my wife's behavior back home and during brief hospital visits became even more peculiar. She started mentioning names and events I didn't remember, referencing conversations that hadn't occurred, and at times she would freeze mid-sentence, her eyes wide as if seeing something invisible to the rest of the world. I began keeping a journal, documenting everything she said and did, the movements I saw, the whispers I heard, because I knew that my memory alone couldn't be trusted in this growing storm of uncertainty. Each entry revealed patterns that were hard to ignore, recurrent references to a presence I couldn't define, repeated mentions of someone following us, and strange coincidences involving hospital staff and our neighbors. Every detail built upon the other, constructing a lattice of mystery that I could neither ignore nor fully understand. Adding to the escalating tension was a subplot that no one saw coming. My daughter started acting strangely too. She's usually bright and perceptive, but suddenly she became withdrawn, glancing at empty corners of rooms, whispering names I didn't recognize. One night, she told me she had seen someone in her bedroom, someone just like Mom, and that person had warned her not to trust certain people. At first, I dismissed it as imagination or stress, but when I realized the timing coincided with the hospital incidents, the fear crept deeper into my chest. It wasn't just my wife, it wasn't just me, it wasn't even just the hospital. Somehow, this mystery had woven itself into our home, into our family, and the very air we breathed. By now, the story had developed multiple layers of suspense, each one intersecting with another in unpredictable ways. My wife's apparent doppelganger in the ICU, her strange references to unseen presences, the daughter's frightening observations, and the nurse's cryptic warnings all collided into a storm of uncertainty. The emotional stakes were higher than ever, and my mind refused to rest. Every step I took, every question I asked, seemed to pull me deeper into a labyrinth where the walls themselves shifted, and the truth always seemed just out of reach. And yet, even as the tension escalated, there were fleeting moments of hope and clarity, glimpses of understanding that teased me with possibilities. I started connecting the dots between past experiences, subtle changes in behavior, and the tiny, almost imperceptible signs that something was influencing our lives. Every unusual event, the flickering lights, the whispers, the sudden cold spots, the moving objects, became part of a pattern, a map leading somewhere I couldn't yet identify. But just as I thought I was on the verge of comprehension, another twist would emerge, unraveling the tenuous thread of logic I had been clinging to, and I would be thrown back into confusion and fear. As viewers watching this story unfold, I want you to feel that same tension, that same psychological pull that gripped me night after night. Imagine walking into a hospital corridor, seeing someone you love in distress, only to have the world insist that person never existed. Imagine piecing together fragments of reality, clues scattered across different locations, times, and perspectives, while constantly questioning your own memory. This is the experience I lived, and it is the essence of the mystery that I'm sharing with you. The stakes are higher than just fear, they are about trust, perception, and the terrifying possibility that the people closest to us might exist in ways we cannot fully comprehend. And here's the cliffhanger that pushed everything over the edge. The next morning, I received a call from a doctor I had never met, someone claiming to have crucial information about my husband's condition. When I arrived at the hospital, I was met not just with answers, but with a revelation that shattered the fragile understanding I had been building. It involved someone who had been present that night, someone connected to my wife in ways I couldn't have imagined, and it threatened to rewrite everything I thought I knew about reality, identity, and the line between life and death. I won't tell you what that revelation was just yet, because the journey to understanding it is the heart of this story, and it's a journey you're about to take with me. Every moment, every detail, every unexpected twist is leading toward that point, and only by following carefully, staying alert to every subtle sign, and questioning what you think you know will you begin to see the truth. By the time we reach the next part, the tension will be unbearable, the stakes will be higher than ever, and the mystery of my wife's tears outside the ICU will become something far bigger, far stranger, and far more frightening than you could ever anticipate. The moment I stepped into the doctor's office, I knew everything was about to change. The air felt heavier, thick with a tension I could almost touch, and the doctor's expression was serious, bordering on urgent. He gestured for me to sit, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made my heart sink. "What you saw last night," he began carefully, "isn't something we normally explain to families. But in your case, it's important you understand." My mind raced, the words already twisting into every terrifying possibility I had imagined. He paused, then continued, explaining something so shocking that it made the hairs on my arms stand on end. There had been a medical experiment at the hospital, one designed to track consciousness and emotional responses under extreme stress. Certain patients and the people closest to them could perceive echoes of consciousness, shadow versions of themselves or their loved ones, under very specific conditions. The implications were staggering. I struggled to breathe, to process it all, as the doctor outlined how my wife's appearance outside the ICU, the doppelganger I had seen on the security camera, and even my daughter's whispered warnings were all connected. They weren't hallucinations, but manifestations of something like an emotional resonance, a feedback loop between the patients, their families, and the hospital environment. In other words, the hospital had somehow created conditions where perception itself could fracture, causing some people to see what others could not, to interact with echoes of reality that weren't fully tangible yet were horrifyingly real. It explained everything: the nurse's denial, the fleeting movements, the strange occurrences at home, but it didn't make it any less terrifying to realize that someone you love could exist simultaneously in two forms, or that the line between what's real and what's perceived could be so fragile. When I finally stepped back into the ICU hallway, the tension that had seemed unbearable now shifted into something even stranger. My wife was there again, but this time, her fear was tinged with understanding. She looked at me, and for the first time in weeks, our eyes locked with clarity. She whispered, "I knew you'd find me." It wasn't just words. It was a connection, a confirmation that we had navigated the edge of something incomprehensible and survived. My daughter clung to us, no longer afraid of shadows in the corners, finally reassured that the strange visions she had experienced were part of something larger and not a threat in themselves. The nurse approached, nodding silently, and I realized that everyone involved, hospital staff, family, and even the echoes themselves, had played a role in guiding us through a labyrinth of perception and fear. But just as relief began to settle, the unexpected twist hit. When I glanced at the monitor displaying the ICU cameras, I saw movement in a room that had been empty moments ago. It wasn't my wife and it wasn't my daughter. It was another figure, faint but unmistakably human, watching us from the shadows. My heart jumped as I realized that while we had navigated one layer of the mystery, the hospital held deeper secrets, echoes of consciousness or experiments that hadn't been fully explained. The doctor, noticing my gaze, didn't offer reassurance this time. He simply said, "There are some things even science struggles to fully define." And just like that, the story reminded me that some mysteries are bigger than a single night, bigger than one family, and that even when answers appear, the unknown can linger, silent but present, reshaping reality in ways we may never fully understand. Walking away from that hospital, I felt a strange mixture of closure and awe. My husband had survived, my wife and daughter were safe, and yet the experience had fundamentally altered the way I saw reality. I understood now that perception is delicate, that love and fear can create echoes powerful enough to manifest as something tangible, and that human intuition, my wife's, my daughter's, my own, is far more complex and mysterious than I had ever realized. But the lingering question, the quiet tension that hums beneath every memory, is this: if reality can fracture once, if echoes of our consciousness can appear in ways that defy explanation, then how can we ever be truly certain of what's real? As you watch this video and reflect on the story, I want you to consider your own life. The people you love, the moments you share, the subtle signs you might dismiss as coincidence, they could carry layers of meaning beyond what you perceive. This isn't just a story about a hospital, an ICU, or even a mysterious doppelganger. It's a story about trust, about perception, and about the invisible threads that connect us to the world and to each other. My wife's tears outside the ICU weren't just an emotional reaction. They were a signal, a warning, and a lesson all at once. And the fact that we survived and understood what we did is miraculous, yet it leaves a haunting truth in its wake. Sometimes the most profound mysteries exist right in front of us, even when no one else can see them. By the end of this journey, the conflicts, the nurse's denial, the strange appearances, the family's fear, are resolved in ways that reveal a larger, awe-inspiring truth, yet the story leaves you with an open-ended sense of wonder and caution. You realize that while we can uncover answers, some shadows linger, shaping our perception, and reminding us that reality is more fragile, mysterious, and profound than we ever imagined. And just when you think the story has ended, when you feel relief and closure, there's that final haunting realization. The echoes, the shadows, and the unseen presences might not just belong to the hospital. They could exist anywhere, in moments of fear, in the cracks of perception, silently observing, waiting, reminding us that some mysteries never truly end. They only evolve, leaving us changed forever.